The desert wind carried whispers of smoke and screams across the valley that morning, but Maria Esperanza Rodriguez had learned long ago not to listen. She kept her eyes down, her hands steady as she ground corn in the courtyard of the hacienda, the stone metate smooth and familiar beneath her palms. At 17, she had perfected the art of invisibility, of making herself small enough that the Spanish soldiers barely noticed her presence, of moving through shadows like she belonged to them. But today would be different. She noticed the tension first in the way the soldiers moved, their hands never far from their weapons, their eyes scanning the horizon with unusual frequency. The Apache had been raiding nearby settlements, they said, growing bolder, more fierce. Her mother, who worked in the kitchen, had warned her to stay close, to avoid the soldiers' attention, especially now when they were nervous and cruel. Maria's heritage was written across her face in ways she could never hide, her mother's Spanish features softened by her father's Apache blood. She had never known him, only the stories her mother whispered late at night, of a man who moved like water through stone, who had shown her mother a kind of gentleness she had never known in the mission compound. He had disappeared before Maria was born, likely killed in one of the endless conflicts between the Apache and the Spanish crown. The soldiers called her mestiza when they were being polite. They called her other things when they weren't. It was Capitan Morales who found her that afternoon. She was carrying water from the well when his shadow fell across her path, and she knew immediately that something had shifted, that the careful balance she maintained had finally crumbled. His face was flushed with pulque and rage, and 3 other soldiers flanked him, their expressions hard and eager. "Your people attacked the Rodriguez ranch last night," he said, though she shared that family's name only by the accident of her mother's servitude to them. "Killed 6 men. Took women and children." "I am not Apache, Capitan," she said softly, keeping her eyes down. "I am Christian. I am loyal to—" His hand cracked across her face with enough force to send her sprawling, the water jar shattering across the stones. "You have their blood," he spat. "That makes you one of them. Makes you a savage." What happened next occurred in fragments, like pieces of a nightmare she couldn't quite assemble into coherent memory. They dragged her to the blacksmith's forge. They held her down while Morales heated an iron rod in the flames until it glowed orange and angry. Her mother's screams were distant, cut short by someone's fist. And then the smell of her own burning flesh, the word they pressed into the skin of her left forearm letter by letter, mestiza. Half-blood. They wanted everyone to know what she was, to see their judgment written permanently on her body. She didn't remember passing out, only waking to darkness and pains so consuming she couldn't think beyond it. Someone had thrown her outside the compound walls like refuse. She could hear coyotes in the distance, and wondered dimly if they would find her before morning. That's when he appeared. At first, she thought he was a fever dream, a ghost conjured by pain and trauma. He moved without sound, materializing from the darkness like smoke given form. In the moonlight, she could see he was Apache, the way he wore his hair, the deerskin clothing, the Winchester rifle slung across his back. He knelt beside her, and she waited for death, almost welcomed it. Instead, his hands were gentle as he examined her arm. She heard him make a sound low in his throat, something between grief and rage. Without a word, he lifted the cloak from his own shoulders and wrapped it around her, covering her burned and branded flesh, covering her trembling body. The cloak still held his warmth. "Can you walk?" he asked in Spanish, his accent thick but understandable. She tried, failed, whimpered at the fresh surge of agony. He made a decision then, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. She should have been afraid. Everything she'd been taught said she should be terrified. But the soldiers had already shown her what cruelty looked like, and this man's touch spoke only of care. They traveled through the night, him moving through terrain that would have been treacherous in daylight with a sure-footedness that seemed impossible. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of his steady heartbeat, the rhythm of his stride, the security of his arms around her. Dawn found them in a hidden canyon where water trickled from stone and ancient pictographs decorated the walls. He laid her down gently on soft hides, built a small fire, and began tending her wounds with a knowledge that surprised her. He made a poultice from desert plants she didn't recognize, applied it to her burned arm with infinite patience. The pain receded to something almost bearable. "I am Dakia," he said finally, sitting back. "Strong walker. I saw what they did to you. You were watching the compound? We watched all the Spanish settlements." His jaw tightened. "We did not raid the Rodriguez ranch. That was Comanche, or perhaps other Apache bands, but not my people. The Spanish blame us for everything." She looked at him properly then, this man who had saved her life. He was perhaps 10 years older than her, his face marked with the hardships of a life lived in resistance. But his eyes held something she hadn't expected, a deep sadness, a weariness that spoke of too many losses. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "My wife was mestiza," he said finally. "Taken by missionaries as a child, raised in their ways, but she never forgot her Apache blood. She returned to us 5 summers ago." He paused, and the grief in his expression told the rest of the story. "The Spanish soldiers found her when she went to trade. They killed her because they said she was a traitor to Christianity." Maria felt tears slip down her cheeks, both for his loss and for the senseless cruelty of it all, this endless cycle of violence and retribution that consumed everyone it touched. Over the days that followed, as her body slowly healed, she learned his story. Dakia had been a respected warrior, a man who had fought in countless battles against the Spanish, the Mexican government, the American settlers who kept pushing into Apache lands. He had lost his wife, his brother, his parents to the conflicts. He had every reason to hate someone like her, someone who carried Spanish blood, who had been raised in their faith. But hatred wasn't what she saw when he looked at her. He taught her things during those weeks in the canyon, how to move silently, how to read the desert's signs, how to find water where none seemed to exist. He spoke to her in his language, teaching her words that felt ancient and powerful on her tongue. She told him stories her mother had shared, fragments of Apache culture that had been passed down despite the missionaries' best efforts to stamp them out. "Your father," Dakia said one evening as they sat by the fire, "was Chiricahua Apache?" She nodded. "My mother said he was called Nach, after the great chief's son, though I don't know if that was truly his name or just what she called him." Dakia's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering in his eyes. "I knew a man called Nach. A good warrior, fierce fighter. He disappeared after a raid near the Spanish mission. We thought he had been killed. Perhaps he was," Maria said softly. "My mother never saw him again." The brand on her arm healed slowly, leaving scar tissue that would spell out her shame forever. But Dakia never looked at it with disgust or pity. One night, as she traced the letters with her fingers in a gesture that had become habit, he took her hand. "They meant to mark you as lesser," he said. "But you are not defined by their hatred. You carry 2 peoples in your blood, that makes you twice as strong, not half of anything." She had never thought of it that way. All her life, she had been taught that her mixed heritage was a stain, a sin, something to be ashamed of. But in Dakia's eyes, she saw only respect, only value. When the time came for her to decide what to do next, she knew she couldn't return to the hacienda. Her mother would grieve, but Maria would only bring her more danger. The Spanish would not let her branded defiance go unpunished. And truthfully, after tasting freedom in the canyon, after learning what it meant to be valued for who she was rather than used for what she could provide, she couldn't imagine going back to that life of servitude and shadows. "I want to learn," she told Dakia. "I want to know the Apache ways. I want to understand the part of myself that they tried to burn away." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It will not be easy. My people have been betrayed by those with Spanish blood before. They will not trust you quickly." "I know," she said. "But I have nowhere else to go. And She hesitated, then continued, "I am tired of hiding what I am. I want to become whole." Dakia smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him. He stood and retrieved his cloak, the same one he had wrapped around her that terrible night. He placed it over her shoulders again, But this time the gesture felt different, not a covering for her shame, but a claiming, a welcome. "Then we go together," he said simply. As they prepared to leave the canyon, Maria looked down at her branded arm one last time. The word was still there, would always be there. But somehow its power over her had changed. They had meant to mark her as half, as incomplete, as something to be despised. Instead, they had accidentally told the truth. She was both Apache and Spanish, warrior and survivor, scarred but unbroken. And wrapped in Dakia's cloak, walking beside a man who had shown her that mercy and strength could exist in the same heart, she finally felt like she was becoming complete.